Hi, my name's Joe Heumann. I'm a professor of communications studies, and my area is film.
I'm Robin Murray, and I'm a professor of English, and I started out in 19th and early 20th century American literature and eco-criticism, and have retooled in film studies, and I'm now applying eco-critical approaches to film.
Robin and I have been working collaboratively for the last 5 years, working on a number of essays that dealt with the issue of film and eco-criticism, and it's evolved into a book, Ecology in Popular Film, Cinema on the Edge. And I want to talk a little bit about this concept of edge cinema, which usually for us refers to films that can be read in multiple ways. And many of the films that we're looking at have never been critiqued for what we feel are their eco or environmental concerns. And so we've had a lot of time to work on films from 1896 to the present. And one of the successes of our work has evolved into this particular book published this year by SUNY Press. And now we're working on 2 other projects specifically focusing on the issue of the American Western and the issue of the American feature-length animated film. And Robin's going to be talking more about those and those topics in particular.
So our approach is drawing on what Cheryl Glotfeldt sees as how the evolution of in eco-criticism has moved from a first, second to a third tier. And it's actually paralleling that of women's studies and feminist theory, where maybe they're beginning with this idea of looking at representations of women, but in eco-criticism, of course, they're looking at representations of nature. So in the first phase of eco-criticism, they're looking at representations of nature. The second phase, they're actually trying to reclaim some of the nature writing that had been lost. And the third phase is where we are, where we're looking at a variety of theoretical approaches, some that actually draw on deep ecology. And those are the approaches that we're taking in all 3 of our books. In the first book, we're looking at primarily popular film, and we're looking at, as Joe had said, those edge films, films that maybe where the message may be seen as blatant to us, but not to others, like in Pale Rider, where only Clint Eastwood, the director of the film, and of course the star, was noticing that hydraulic mining was the primary message of the film. But then we're also looking at that film in terms of eco-terrorism as well as in terms of the hydraulic mining. And then of those films where perhaps you wouldn't see the film as having an environmental message at all, like in 28 Days Later, where they're looking at the idea of apocalypse and maybe the regeneration of the idea of a zombie film from the virus that's a rage virus. But there we see the film actually kind of looking at this idea of whether or not humanity is necessary in terms of the evolution of humanity. Now that's sort of where our first book is going. We're moving from 1896 to the present, but our second book is looking at Westerns and through the lens of environmental history. So there we're applying a really particular theory to help us kind of look at and reclaim some of the history the environmental history that's in the films from the 1920s to the present. The third of our books, is looking at animated features, and there we're looking at animated features through 3 lenses based on our study of 7-minute films from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that showed us that the environmental messages are in the films in these 3 ways. One is that where they're looking at how culture and nature are bifurcated, and humanity is always battling the natural world. The second of these kind of categories that we looked at is looking at how nature and culture can work towards interdependence. And the third of these is looking at how perhaps our treatment of the natural world can be critiqued. And that's kind of how our work is going right now.